316, John chapter 19 through 21. Here we see that Jesus has been ordered to be flogged. Pilate had him whipped with metal-tipped whips. And yeah, not only did they flog him, but they also mocked him. They put him on a purple robe and a crown woven in thorns. And they placed it on his head and they mocked him. Hail, King of the Jews. Isn't that something? And so once that was done, Pilate, they sent him back to Pilate. Pilate didn't see a problem with Jesus. He didn't see any fault. He didn't see that Jesus was guilty in any way. But the leading priests and the temple guard, they shouted that he should be crucified. And then you had where Pilate went and questioned Jesus again, and he said he found no fault. But get this, you have the Jewish leaders at this point, they step in and they say, well, you're no friend to Caesar. This man has supposedly is the king of the Jews, and which makes him a rebel. So he is against Caesar, and if you release this man, then you are against Caesar. Isn't that something? So Pilate go ahead and allow them to crucify Jesus. Isn't that something, knowing that he was an innocent man? So Jesus carries his cross. Yeah, he carries his cross to where he's going to be crucified, to this place they call the place of skull. It's also called Golgotha, I believe it's called. And he is nailed to the cross. There are two criminals, because Jesus is not a criminal. Two criminals who's also crucified with Jesus, one on either side. So get this, the soldiers, they decide they want to divide Jesus' clothes. They want to divide these clothes among themselves. And then not only that, for his robe, they actually throw dice to see who would win his clothes. Isn't that something? So Jesus looks down and he tells his mother, look, your son. And he tells this disciple who he loves, look, your mother. And the disciple takes him home, takes the mother, Mary, to his home once it's all done. And I pick up that he's going to take care of her at this point. I'm not certain what the extent is, but it looked like he was passing his duty as a son to the mother, to the disciple. That's just my opinion. My question was, I wonder where Joseph was during all this time. Joseph, the father, was he still living, right? They don't mention him in any of the books. They don't mention what happened to Joseph at all in any of the books, other than the fact that he assisted Mary. And yeah, we know that they had other children. And get this, as it neared Passover celebration, the Jewish leaders didn't want the bodies to remain on the crosses. So what they were told to do was to the soldiers were told to break the legs of the men who were being crucified so that it would speed up their death. And so Jesus, by the time they got there, Jesus had already given up. He had already given up his spirit. And the other two, their legs were broken. But get this, fast forward. You have Joseph of Arimathea. He wants Jesus' body, so he goes to Pilate and he requests his body, which he is granted. And we find here that Joseph was a secret disciple. He served Jesus undercover. And not only that, but we know him to be a rich man, and that he is also one of the members of the high court. We learned that from a different book. But it says here that he was a secret disciple. Anyway, he takes the body down, and him along with Nicodemus. They didn't mention Nicodemus in the other books, but Nicodemus assisted Joseph, and he supplied 75 pounds of scented perfumed oil. And they dressed Jesus, wrapped him up in the linen, and they placed him in a new tomb. So fast forward, Mary goes, she observed all this, of course. She goes to it is Mary Magdalene, guys, just so you know. She goes to the tomb later, and her purpose, we already know in previous books, it was to anoint Jesus. But when she got there, she found that his body was gone. And there were two angels there. She rushes back and she tells the disciples, Peter and another disciple comes and they see that the body is empty. The tomb is empty as well. And Mary's crying. The angel asks her, why is she crying? Another person outside the tomb asks her why she's crying. She tells them they took her master. She want him back. And that one person she thought was a gardener happens to be Jesus. She just didn't recognize him. The only way she knows him is because he called her name. And so he tells her, don't touch him, because she couldn't touch him because he had not ascended to the Father yet. But yeah, isn't that something to see this, right? And so later on that evening, behind locked doors, they tell us, behind locked doors, and we know why the doors were locked, because they thought that the soldiers were going to come and get them and kill them. I believe we found that out in a previous book. But they're behind locked doors, and Jesus appears to them, and he shows them the nail, the holes in his wrist, and in his hands, and he shows them the scar on his side, and he allows them to touch it. And so once that is done, later, Thomas, who had not been there, they told him they had seen Jesus. He said, I would not believe unless I see for myself. I have to touch his nailed hands and touch his scar on his side. 8 days later, yeah, Jesus reappeared, and he tells Thomas, take the time, it feels all this. Now he's a believer. And like Jesus says, you had to see me in order to believe, but blessed are those who hear about me and believe. And that is true. If you don't even see him and you believe, that right there is something. If you're one of those people who had to see to believe, yeah. And that's Jesus' whole point, believe. If you believe the message, isn't that something? So Thomas received the message from his friends, and he didn't believe it. Isn't that something? He had to see it to believe it. So fast forward, Peter goes fishing, him and a few other guys, there's like 7 of them, they go fishing. And so they're fishing, they catch nothing at all. So then they hear this guy from the shore that asks them if they've caught anything. They say, no, we haven't caught anything. So he says, cast your net on the right-hand side of the boat. They do that, right? They catch so many fish, large-sized fish. It could have broken the net, but it didn't. Come to find out, there was 153 fish in that net, and they caught them all. And so when they got to shore, they saw that there was breakfast. This person had made breakfast for them. Isn't that something? And they know that it's Jesus. They know that it's Jesus who had prepared that meal for them. Isn't that something? They didn't mention it because they just didn't mention it. They just knew. And so Jesus asked Peter like 3 times, do you love me? And Jesus says, and Peter says, yes, I love you. Yes, Lord, you know I love you. And so he was hurt that Jesus didn't believe, because when he asked him the 3rd time, he said, you know I love you. And so Jesus told him, said, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, care for my lambs. And then he tells Peter that right now he's able to do for himself, but he's going to get old and other people will be leading him where he don't want to go. And so to me, that was like, he let Peter know that he's going to live an old life until he's very old. Isn't that something? And so Peter asked me, said, what about that other disciple, the one who we find that Jesus loved? And he says, don't worry about what happens to them. So they thought that he was going to live forever, but no, that wasn't what he said. He said, just don't worry about what happens to him, basically. Yeah, so then the scriptures, the reading today ends about the Bible. Why the book was written was to testify of Jesus and everything that occurred. But there's no way, it also mentions that there's no way that everything Jesus did could be recorded. It would be too much for the world to even store. So yeah, there you have it, guys. This was the last book of John, and we are going into Acts. Isn't that something? So we completed the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we're going into the book of Acts. Isn't that something? So there you go. Guys, that's day number 316. John chapter 19 through 21. You have a God-filled blessed day.